Welcome, and thank you for joining us tonight. I'd like to wish each of you a very happy new year, and we're thankful that you're able to join us tonight or whenever you're watching this recording. This is the first Sunday of 2021, and so we're thankful that we made it into this new year. And I mentioned in the lesson this morning that I know that 2020 has been challenging, but we did learn a lot of things through that. Hopefully we've been able to be very much appreciative of a lot of different things. And so I want to wish you a happy new year and thank you so much for joining us here tonight. I want us to think about, turn your Bibles, if you will, to the book of Psalm chapter 14. Psalm chapter 14. And I titled this devotional thought, Who Are You Seeking? What are you seeking? And think about the idea of seeking. But there's several things here in Psalm 14 that I want us to point out and that I think we can relate to, and that also will challenge us in our walk, especially in this new year for our church family. We're looking at the theme over this next year, at least that's the plan, to look at the idea, the theme of glorifying God. And we want to do that throughout our life and in all the things that we do. But also, I'm enjoying looking at the book of Psalms, and that's what when I post a video for Sunday night devotionals, that's what I've been looking at, is trying to go through the Psalms and look at some different things about the Psalms and some of the Psalms that are written for us, the things that we can learn from those. And Psalm 14 is another one of those, and so I want us to think about some of these things. But notice what the psalmist says in Psalm 14, and we want to begin in verse 1. The psalmist writes, "The fool has said in his heart, there is no God. They are corrupt. They have done abominable works. There is none who does good. The Lord looks down from heaven upon the children of men to see if there are any who understand, who seek God. They have all turned aside. They have together become corrupt. There is none who does good, no, not one. Have all the workers of iniquity no knowledge? Who eat up my people as they eat bread, and do not call on the Lord. There they are in great fear, for God is with the generation of the righteous. You shame the counsel of the poor, but the Lord is his refuge. Oh, that the salvation of Israel would come out of Zion. When the Lord brings back the captivity of his people, let Jacob rejoice and Israel be glad." You know, there's a number of things that stand out in my mind as I think about this psalm. One of the first things that comes to my mind, do you remember back in the beginning when God destroyed mankind with the flood and Noah and his family were saved in the ark? Do you remember how God, he was very, very frustrated with mankind because there was so much wickedness on the earth? I think also the children of Israel themselves, God's own people, when they're out in the wilderness wandering. I believe it was in Exodus chapter 33 when God wanted to strike the people down. They were ready to stone Moses and Aaron, and Moses is the one who comes to their defense when God's ready to strike them down, but they've complained against God and in a sense turned against God. And so I think about those situations when I think about this passage here. And the psalmist, he starts out, he says, "The fool has said in his heart, there is no God." When you think about heart, I think about the book of Matthew chapter 15 and what Jesus says about the things that come forth from the heart, of defilement and those kind of things that come from the heart. In Matthew 15, he's talking about defilement that comes from within. And in verses 18, 19, and 20, this is what Jesus says. They've asked him about washing hands and those kind of stuff. People were always trying to trick Jesus, and Jesus was always aware of that. And here's a time where Jesus has talked to them about people worshiping with their mouth, but their heart are far from him. And he says, in vain they worship. They begin to ask him about eating with washed hands. And this is what Jesus says. Matthew 15, beginning in verse 18. "But those things which proceed out of the mouth come from the heart, and they defile a man. For out of the heart proceed evil thoughts, murderers, adulteries, fornications, thefts, false witness, blasphemies. These are the things which defile a man. And the psalmist says, the fool has said in his heart. The proverb writer said in Proverbs chapter 23 and verse 7, as a man, so as he thinks in his heart, so is he. In other words, what we dwell on, what we feel in our hearts and our minds, that's the kind of people we're going to be. And the psalmist says, the fool has said in his heart, which foolishness seems to describe a whole different class of people. That the people who strive after foolishness and wickedness, or strive after wickedness, go against God, rebel against God, do not believe in God, speak against God. It's as if God is saying, and this is really hard to think about. When I was brought up, you don't call anybody fool. And then I grew up in the 80s and we see Mr. T on TV saying the exact same thing to a degree. But the psalmist says, hey, the fool, the class of people who are foolish, are the people who feed themselves with wickedness, because out of that flows wickedness, out of that heart. It's not about what goes in your mouth, it's about what comes out of the heart. And so we feed ourselves, our hearts and our minds, with selfishness, evilness, all those kind of things, and that's what's going to come out. And the psalmist seems to be indicating that's a group of people, that's a type of people, that is a class of people who are foolish. The foolish people, the foolish, wicked, unrighteous people of the world, they say in their heart, there is no God. He says they are corrupt. The idea is like if you pour a glass of milk and you leave it setting out for days and days, what happens? It begins to be spoiled, and you don't want to drink it. It'll make you sick, right? Well, this is the picture that he's given of a person who fills their hearts and minds with selfishness, abundance of selfishness, and wickedness and evil and those kind of things, all worldly things, are wicked things of the world. Then they become a foolish type people, and they're like that milk that turns bad. What happens? It creates a depraved type person. It creates an awful lifestyle. It creates things that are not blessed. And that's the kind of idea that this individual or the psalmist is talking about. He says, they have done abominable works. Think about the worst things. That's, again, that milk. When that milk goes sour, you don't want to drink that milk. Think about the worst things ever. And some of those sins are listed throughout Scripture. Some of those abominable things that just aren't right. My mind goes to the book of 1 Corinthians. In the church at Corinth, there were some things that they were doing, or they were actually not doing, but they were turning their head to those that were in the congregation, that not even the Gentiles, not even the ones who they thought were the least of the least, were participating in. And they were turning their face to it. They were turning their cheek to it. They were turning their eye, their ear, turning everything to it. And this is the kind of person that the psalmist is describing here. They have done abominable works. There is none who does good. And then he describes how the Lord looks down to see if there's anybody who understands Him, or who is seeking to understand Him, or who are seeking Him. You know, when I was thinking about that, over the weekend, I've been thinking about this passage, and I thought about that term, who do you seek? Are they seeking God? Do you remember the game that many of us have played when we were kids, hide and seek? And we would hide, and we would count to 50 or 100, 75, 100, whatever the number was. And we would count, and everybody else would go hide, and then we would seek to find those individuals. And it was a fun game. I loved that game, enjoyed that game. And God has come down to see, is there anyone who is trying to understand me? Is there anyone who is seeking me? Because this foolish group of people, they have said there is no God. And he's looking at the overall general population of humanity, and there's very few. Few that are seeking him, few that are wanting to honor him, few that are wanting to understand him. And as we read this, we may think, wow, that seems like today. However, we know there are thousands and millions of Christians throughout the world. We want that number to grow, but there are people who are seeking to know God and understand God and seeking God. But there are people who are not as well. And so God here in the Psalms looks down and he says, they have all turned aside. They have together become corrupt. As a group of people, they've become corrupt. I think about, again, the flood. You think about the way the world is now. We look across the world and we say, the world's corrupt because of sin. There is none who does good. No, not one. Maybe you feel that way today. But the psalmist is describing, at least in that time, a group of people who seem to be very ungodly, very unrighteous. God, he describes as God looks down and doesn't find anybody really seeking him. They don't want to do any good. They become corrupt. He says, have all the workers of iniquity no knowledge, who eat up my people as they eat bread and do not call on the Lord? These people eat up the people of God, he says, as just like if they were eating bread. And is there no one to call on the name of the Lord? And then verse 5, Psalm 14, verse 5, he says, there they are in great fear, for God is with the generation of the righteous. I read one individual who described these individuals, how they come to a point in their life where they realize and they have great fear because of their realization that God cares about those who serve him. And there is a place of torment. There is a place where there's pain and suffering outside of this life. Sometimes we think this life, people use the phrase, this is like hell on earth. And sometimes it is. But the reality is there's a great wickedness and a place of wickedness and torment that's worse than anything we're ever going to experience on this earth, or that anybody else is going to experience on this earth. And that's why it's important for us to talk about God, to talk about Christ and the Spirit and the church and His Word and holiness and righteousness, and try to live that way, because the world is watching. And that's why it's important for Christians to get in the game. And if you watch football, sometimes these guys, they play hurt and bad things happen during games, and they keep fighting, keep scrapping. And that's the way it is with the Christian, because we know there's something greater. And God is with the righteous. For the unrighteous, they will experience fear at some point, even if it's not until eternity, because God is with those that are righteous, and He's not with those that are unrighteous. He says, you shame the counsel of the poor, but the Lord is his refuge. You see, that's what we have in God. Those who seek God, those who believe God and seek God and try to know more about God and understand God by studying His Word and spending time with Him daily, God walks with them, and God is their refuge. In the Old Testament, the Bible talks about the city of refuge. When a person has been cast out, they can go to this city of refuge, and they can have safety and protection. And that's what God is for the one who seeks Him, the one who obeys Him and lives for Him and with Him. The Lord is his refuge. And folks, in 2021, that should bring us hope, to think about God being our refuge, God being the place that we can go to find rest, to find recharge, to be renewed, to find strength and protection when we're down and beat down by life and the things of life and the people in life sometimes. The Lord is his refuge. Now notice verse 7 and how the psalmist is feeling and what he cries out to God. Oh, that the salvation of Israel would come out of Zion. When the Lord brings back the captivity of his people, let Jacob rejoice and Israel be glad. You ever felt like there's so much wickedness around and there's not many people trying to serve God, and you're like, God, why don't you just take care of this? Why don't you just save us? Why don't you just help us? Why don't you just take all of this sin and all this evil and wickedness away so that your people can live and serve in peace and joy and righteousness and together with love and harmony? Well, the reality is the only way we can accomplish that in this life is by every person submitting to Jesus Christ, seeking to glorify God in all that we do, and saying, does this honor God? Does this give praise to God? Does this magnify the splendor of God? If it does not, don't do it. If it does not, set it aside. Do without it. Because the Lord, one day, if not in this life, in the next, there will be a place like that. A place of safety. A place of painlessness. So I hope that this year is much better than this past year, and that we can find some rest and some ease. But there's always going to be those who would be against us, Satan in particular, and Satan's going to use things, Satan's going to use people, and throughout 2021, however many more years we have, the reality is, the importance is that we take refuge in the Lord, that we seek Him, that we try to gain more knowledge about Him and live for Him and serve Him and obey Him, because that's where refuge is going to come, if not in this life, in the next to come. And aren't you thankful? I am. Well, we appreciate you joining us tonight, or whenever you're watching this video. We hope that it's been helpful to you and encouraging, and I hope that you will continue to read through the Psalms and study the Psalms. And I hope that Psalm 14, I've made some notes in my Bible as I've studied this. I hope that you will do the same. I hope that you'll go back and read it and study it and look at some different things about it. Look at some of these words and phrases and think about some different things about that. But see how this psalm, the psalmist is writing these things about God looking down. Is like, where's everybody? Where's the people that's seeking me? I can't find any. And then the psalmist says, oh, that the salvation of Israel would come out of Zion, that God would just save us, take care of us, take away this evil and wickedness. Well, the fact of the matter is, one day He will. And don't you want to be on His side when that happens? Don't you want to hear those words, well done, good and faithful servant? I sure do, and I know you do as well. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. And if we can help you in any way, check us out on our website, SavannahChurchChrist.com. Give us a call. Let us pray with you and pray for you. Thank you again. God bless.